Hello to everyone. I'm Arnie Strauss from the Academic Advisory Council for Career Physician, and we're having a discussion about clinical research and its value. I'd like to welcome our Child Health Advisory Group, led by Bruder Stapleton, Valerie Opipari, Christine Gleason, Craig Hillemeier, Bob Sawin, and Danielle Laraque-Arena. The topic of clinical research within pediatrics is, I believe, important because obviously that's the way that we change care. And I remember vividly the way I took care of patients as an intern many, many years ago, and how much it's changed since then because of the results of clinical research. But I would like to ask Valerie Opipari to address the question of what are the pluses and minuses of doing clinical research in pediatrics, and welcome any comments from other members of the group.
Thanks, Arnie. I mean, it's kind of difficult to think about the minuses because I think there isn't a discipline in pediatrics that hasn't benefited from both basic science discovery as well as, the impact of clinical trials. I'm a pediatric oncologist, and in my career, we've seen survival rates in childhood cancers dramatically change, in large part because of the fact that people cooperated together, took information from basic sciences, applied it in randomized clinical trials, and came up with improved therapies. And what's been so wonderful to see in my career is how the clinical trials that used to be very focused in pediatric oncology now involve, cancer surgeons and radiologists with interests in the field, and how their contributions have really advanced our diagnostics and our therapeutic outcomes in terms of improved surgical care. So I'm biased. I guess negatives, it's like any kind of research. It takes a team to be around. It takes resources and money. A lot of people don't think or seem to think that perhaps clinical research is less expensive than basic science research. But in my experience, it's quite the opposite. So it really requires, I think, leaders who are committed to advancing outcomes to be willing to spend the resources.
One of the minuses is the difficulty of doing clinical research in children well, in part because of the relative few potential subjects and the rarity of the diseases, so that it's not as easy as in some more prevalent, especially adult disorders.
Valerie, you and your colleagues in oncology have transformed care for cancer, and in our lifetime really emphasized the value of clinical research. One of the real pluses for having clinical research is a study that actually came from our department looked at the outcomes of individuals who were on protocols and those who weren't. And while the outcomes on those who were on protocols were the best, the outcomes on all the patients increased, because once there's very careful attention and adherence to protocols, it turns out that the overall care for everyone increases, and that's been shown in studies, and that is a value that may or may not be recognized, and the overall care for everyone increases, and having the rigor that's associated with excellent clinical care that's required for top clinical research raises the bar for everybody. And I just think that's perhaps an unrecognized value of clinical research then.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I think it does increase the care and rigor of patient care.
Bruder just referenced the outstanding work that's been done on oncology, and that's largely because of the national cooperatives. That sort of gets around the issue you described, Arnie, of the small number of patients in pediatrics. And a trend in some of the surgical conditions in the last 5 to 10 years has been a regional consortia. So a lot of the children's hospitals in the Midwest, for example, got together and realizing that there might be only handfuls of patients in each institution. When you get 10 or 15 institutions together, you can at least start to do larger studies of larger groups of patients. And the same thing's now happening on the West Coast as well. So that's a strategy that I think has been really useful and to deal with some of the challenges you mentioned.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I think that formation of those collaboratives and selecting the right leaders has been really critical to moving clinical research forward.
Yeah, I obviously agree with the comments that have been made. A couple of perspectives from general academic peds, child abuse, and also emerging fields. So I think it's really important to learn from the experience of oncology. I mean, I trained in the time when clinical trials were just beginning for children with oncologic problems, and it really accelerated and translated research into practice. So a couple of points. One is, I think the plus is, one other thing, the American Academy of Pediatrics and others have developed the Academic Pediatric Association practice-based research networks, which are really critical in increasing the N so that you have more power to be able to show effectiveness. But it also allows for the development of what we now know to be implementation research. Okay, you can do studies in clinical trials which are really focused on efficacy, and yet in the real world, in implementation research, you have many testable hypotheses about whether or not you can actually follow the translational pathway to get the effectiveness in practice. So I would say that the relevance of research to practice is critical, but the relevance of practice to research is also critical. So one emerging field, which is the one I'm most involved in now, is injury science and prevention. That concern arose from a primary care perspective, and probably emergency medicine as well, in seeing what the epidemiology was telling us of the major causes of morbidity or mortality for kids, not necessarily what the focus was in traditional clinical practice, but that emergence of injury as a major cause, which derived from practitioners, then is now leading to major research in this field with the relaxation at the federal level, the prohibition on research involving things such as firearms. So I think it's critically important to have that back and forth bi-directional exchange between practice and research and practice that's relevant to the care of children.
Well, we've had a lot of comments about oncology. What we've also seen as these consortiums have spread across disciplines. You know, you've got Improved Care Now with the GI group, you've got the CARA group for the rheumatologists, and they've taken a really advantage of the fact that when you have small, rare populations of patients with really difficult diseases, if people cooperate together, they can share ideas. And one of the things I think that's great about all that work is the fact that it provides a feeder for the young faculty who want to get involved in clinical research. And you don't have to be from a large center in order to participate in these consortiums and really bring forward your ideas. So it gives a platform for individuals to find their voice and to find a niche in academic medicine that really makes a difference. So I think there's just so many benefits to the direct patient care that you do at your own institution, but also the impact that you can make in a field going forward over several decades. And we're seeing that really across pediatric disciplines.
Yes, and thank you for mentioning some of the other consortia, because virtually every specialty now has such an organization. Those are really gaining traction across many institutions.
I just wanted to add neonatology to the group of consortia and networks. The Neonatal Research Network of Clinical Trials has been in place for 40 years, I think now, 30, 40 years. And it is recently supported by NICHD and has a data coordinating center at Research Triangle. And it's recently gotten a lot more involved with the maternal fetal medicine network, which of course is like, how could you not? A lot of the babies initially in these clinical trials were premature babies and so forth. So, and it's gone global too. It has a global impact and global participants in some parts of the clinical trial network. I think one of the things that it provides is more infrastructure support which doesn't come just with becoming a network center. And there's a renewal every 5 or 6 years, of course, for the centers and so forth. But in order to apply to be a center, where then you get funding and so forth, you have to develop the infrastructure in order to be qualified to be a neonatal research network center. And I think that's provided some institutions, divisions, departments that really wanted to get into it, a real reason to go to the dean, the CEO, and say, we've got to do this. It also, to add to what Valerie was saying about leadership and developing leaders, I think that that's a great place, not just for leadership development, but for recruitment of leaders. Once you have people who have been network center lead investigators, they're terrific people to then recruit to other centers that want to be, or that really want to augment their clinical research program and bring with them, certain things that they've learned or have really been able to develop in their network center or other institutions. So,
and those interactions across departments and across geography, I think, can get pretty frequent, and therefore really help develop the relationships that foster the research.
I just wanted to make sure I emphasize the excitement that I've seen that can be generated outside the Department of Pediatrics, even in a pediatric study, such as working with their colleagues in public health and throughout the university in social sciences, in the business school and the like, and really making sure that it can have a beneficial effect that extends beyond the Department of Pediatrics. The other thing that I've seen really exciting with clinical research is that it can become involved in the community and the community aspects of seeing, here is the value of academic pediatrics and research to the community at large. And I think that's something that we oftentimes overlook.
And I think that's a really important point, that it helps involve the community and actually educate the community about research and what's necessary to do it correctly. For example, we had a study here that involved Latino families, and it was led by members of the community, mostly mothers, who got much better interaction, much better results, many more comments and ability and recruitment of subjects because they were part of the community. So I think that's a really important point. Thank you for making that, Craig.
One other point, which we learned many years ago through the PROS network, was that the questions you ask of hospitalized regarding the care of children who are hospitalized may be slightly different than the care in ambulatory settings. And understanding the different practice areas may be very relevant to the questions asked and also to the effectiveness of intervention. So I think that's another aspect. So increasing that, and also the fact that, most of what we do is team science. And so how do we engage the community, Arnie, as you mentioned, is so critical. And where studies have done that, they have asked the community and youth, by the way, who can be co-researchers, okay, is what are their questions? How do they define well-being, which is one of the studies we did in East Harlem, and seeing that the questions, how the research is structured, actually changes because of the participation.
Yeah, I think your comment about research being conducted across the spectrum of sites of care is very important. So not just hospitals, not just outpatient clinics, but actually at home as well. So what's the home environment? How does that impact the outcome of an asthma patient, for example? Those are ways in which pediatrics, as always, leads, because we understand that the family and the home are part of the solution to a problem.
I think clinical research really had a huge impact on me. And one of the things that Arnie, you brought up earlier, and we've been talking about outcomes in clinical care. There are many, many divisions. I was in a very small division in nephrology when we started, participating in the Southwest Pediatric Study Group. We learned from each other. We came to study specific questions, but the interactions and the not just camaraderie, but we were learning how to do dialysis in those days. And we taught each other at these meetings. We learned, have you seen this? Have you seen that? Ultimately, papers sometimes came out of those discussions, but for small divisions, having the opportunity to interact with people from across other many departments to bounce ideas off of, to learn from. There's a huge enriching component of being in one of these collaborative groups. And I've seen that in the See Kids study for nephrology. I had the oversight committee at the NIH on that, and their annual meetings, they do far more than discuss the research. They anticipate things that come up, ethical questions and things that really enrich and these that lead to new ideas. So there's a huge positive for people who participate in this in terms of access to networking and of learning, especially about new therapies and bouncing ideas off each other.
I would emphasize 2 points relative to that. The first is designing the studies as a collaborative group or collective group often provides better measurements than each one of us might have thought of. And then on the other end of the study, interpreting the data and providing ideas about how to communicate the data.
I wanted to go back to something that Craig said and Danielle kind of emphasized around doing research within your own institution and reaching out to develop, connections. I think that there is so much opportunity within a home institution to create multidisciplinary research teams that cross basic science departments to clinical departments. And not just that, if you've got an engineering school, Craig mentioned the School of Public Health, I'd add the School of Nursing, chemical biology. I mean, there are so many rich opportunities. And one of the things I think a leader has to do is, in addition to constantly being an advocate for your own faculty, is understanding what their interest areas are. And at the same time, making sure you understand the wealth of opportunities on your campus beyond your own school of medicine. Because all of us on this panel can give multiple examples of, massive program projects and SPORE grants that got developed by putting people in a room that had very limited connectivity initially, but with discussion and planning and a little bit of resources, really were able to build strong inter and multidisciplinary teams. And I think that to me is, some of those experiences have been some of the most rewarding that I had as a chair, mostly because you could see the impact in disciplines where there wasn't really a great mentorship cadre around them or a big portfolio of research. And to see a young person join into a group and then become a real critical member of that group over time is really, it's just really an extraordinary thing to experience. So I just want to emphasize those points, that not only these consortiums that we've talked about that are, in a region of the country or in a discipline area of disease, but, developing small consortiums at your university that provide opportunity for you to advance a field or impact a field is really another important part of what can be done with applying the clinical research component to the basic sciences.
I agree completely. And of course, in cardiology, engineering is one of those connections that really helps. But there are many other departments and schools actually that, and educating nurse investigators, I think, is a critical advantage of involving the School of Nursing.
One additional point that I know you were going to get to, Arnie, is the idea of whether or not you have the bandwidth, either small departments or large departments, to engage in research. And an experience that I had was that oftentimes in small departments, the clinical group may not feel it has the bandwidth to kind of do the research. But if you put certain stipulations, which I did in one of my positions, was that no recruitment within the clinical departments unless the faculty in that department and the staff are engaged in review of the research and then integrating some of them as is appropriate as co-investigators, so that there's a real collaborative spirit. Because oftentimes in small departments where the clinical function is pretty heavy in terms of clinical responsibilities, research happens just at the recruitment, and the clinical sites are used for recruitment but not engaging their colleagues in the research questions or development of the research question or design. So that actually worked really well. And a number of faculty then in the clinical realm in a small department said, hey, this is relevant to me and I have something to contribute to this process. So really building team science from the bottom up.
Should all departments do clinical research, both large and small? And perhaps you, as a veteran of a large department, can comment upon how a large department can emphasize clinical research.
Well, large departments are very diverse. You know, once you get several hundred faculty, you have physician scientists, you have clinician educators, and clinical scientists. And almost everyone who comes into an academic department wants to contribute in some form in academics. And so having that understanding and making opportunities available, people who are physician scientists doing clinical research is just as rigorous, just as takes, as Valerie said earlier, just as much support and planning as more basic scientist type researcher. But having the opportunity to encourage all your recruitments to participate in some form of investigation, whether it be quality research or education, and to have the infrastructure to allow that to happen. I might say that one of the advantages of the larger departments often have is being at an institution with the CTSA, and the Clinical Translational Science Institutes purposely have to have a regional reach. And so it's an opportunity then to bring in even smaller departments in your region into collaborating with you. And also we had one committee I chaired with the CTSA was to be available for early proposals, helping people clarify their goals. We had mock study sections. We had and how to write an institutional review board application. I mean, those kinds of things you need to be able to provide if someone's not doesn't have a lot of protected time, but can be done in large departments, and really is necessary if you're going to have an academic faculty that's academically engaged. So I think it's very important to encourage your faculty to be involved in clinical research for all the reasons we've talked about.
Yeah, I just want to provide an anecdote. So when I was chair at Vanderbilt, we decided to have a research retreat. And then at that time, we had about 200 faculty. And I sort of focused on the 30 or 40 faculty who were funded to do research. But I invited everybody. And to my surprise, probably shouldn't have been surprised, but 80% of the faculty came. Not only said they wanted to come, but they came because, as you just said, Bruder, they all wanted to participate in the academic mission, even to a small extent or indirectly, but they wanted to feel part of the academic mission. And that involved clinical research. And of course, it involved improving the care for their patients. So I think this is a principle, a truism, that most faculty in academic pediatrics relish participation in research and relish learning new things. I think the discussion focused on several points. First, clinical research is part of an essential component of all departments of pediatrics. And all departments of pediatrics and the faculty within them can and should participate, especially through the consortia that we've talked about. Subspecialty consortia, general pediatrics, pediatric emergency medicine, all with research consortia across many institutions in the country that support research and provide a pathway, as Valerie emphasized, provide a pathway for developing the academic career of younger faculty. So clinical research is crucial to what we do. It augments our clinical care, and obviously over the long term dramatically has improved clinical care for all of our patients. So thank you all for participating, and thank you to those of you who are listening. If you would like to see other topics that we've talked about or review this discussion, please go to our website at careerphysician.com and look at the pediatric Insight tab.